I'm Jenny Klochko, and you're watching my podcast, the platform for guest stories beyond your daily newsfeed. We carry on talking about the Russian money in the British politics, and today we will look at the British aspect and those facts which already known, and there's obviously a lot of manipulation, and we will discuss this matter with my guest today, and an absolute legend, author of many books, the columnist, expert on national security and Russia expert, Edward Lucas. Edward, your thoughts when you've heard news about Nathan Gill and that fact that he admitted he was bribed by Ukrainian politicians, but those who were sort of use Russian money and doing pro-Russian statements. What were your thoughts?
Well, I think I was dismayed but not surprised. We know that there's extensive efforts from both the Kremlin and from the Chinese Communist Party to subvert British politics, both on a personal and on an institutional level. And we see this with dirty money going into politics through big donors, through money going into think tanks, through the sort of what I might call soft subversion of people being invited to things like Valdai and to all the different things the Chinese Communist Party puts on for what they call their special friends. And then at the very sharp end, there's bribery. And that's what Mr. Gill was targeted with, and unfortunately he succumbed. I fear this is only the tip of the iceberg. We need to defend our political system as part of our critical national infrastructure, and we failed to do that so far.
In 2020, the Intelligence and Security Committee report on Russia, and so what was left unsaid and or
Well,
suppressed?
I think to be precise, in the classified version of the report, everything that was needed to be said, I think, was said. I haven't seen it, and the people who have seen it can't talk about it because that's why it's classified. In the unclassified version of the report, which, like all reports from the Intelligence and Security Committee, was in the public domain, it was very clear that we face a serious threat and that we're not doing enough to deal with it. I think the real scandal was that the report didn't come out in time. I was the first witness to the I was the first witness to the Intelligence and Security Committee report into Russia, and I gave my evidence in 2018. And it was clear to me that the committee had been eager to do this report for a while, and they'd been held up by Downing Street. So that was a scandal. Their staff is constrained. They don't have the people that they would like to have, and it's this very important committee has been cold-shouldered on many fronts by Downing Street, but there was particular pressure on the Russia report to delay it. And then when they finished the Russia report, Boris Johnson wouldn't publish it, and that was a really big scandal, because I think the British people should have known that before the 2019 election. Now, the reason they didn't publish it was they didn't want the subject of dirty money in politics to be part of the election campaign. And I think that was a pity. That was a shame, and a stain on British politics and on the way it's supposed to work.
Do you think the Russian approach and attempts to corrupt or supply money for British politicians before the full-scale invasion in Ukraine, and for example now, are they changing? Sort of those politicians who wouldn't mind to have this kind of support from the Kremlin, do you think there's like they have to be more careful, or it's too dangerous to do those, to have those kind of relationship? What's your observation?
So dangerous to who?
Dangerous for two politicians, because maybe they can be caught sooner, or the security situation in Europe is different now, so everyone should be alerted, or I'm just very naive and looking at the wrong side of it.
I think that since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, things have become very different. and it's become politically toxic to be seen as pro-Kremlin. And so a lot of the people who were previously doing business with the Kremlin or enjoying close political contacts with the Kremlin have backed away quite sharply. And so you don't see a kind of vocal pro-Kremlin lobby of the kind that you used to see perhaps certainly 15 years ago and even 10 years ago after the seizure of Crimea. Those people are still there. They're still in the background trying to keep their powder dry for the time for when things change. And you occasionally see them cropping up in letters to the newspapers saying, yeah, in the end, we're going to need a relationship with Russia. So let's not burn all our bridges. But I think that one of the great services the Ukrainians have made with their sacrifice is that they've made it politically impossible to be overtly pro-Kremlin in British politics, or at least in the mainstream of British politics.
When at that time British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, when he was sort of the first who flew to Ukraine after there was a few weeks after the invasion and started this being portraying him say as a leader savior of Ukraine among the all European leaders. Do you think it was? Would you agree with the thought that that was the only way for him to keep to stay in power in the UK while the situation, it was quite negative around him? And there's also was sort of manipulation and scandal in terms of Russian money. And there was, because there was investigation published by New York Times and other things. Or what do you think?
Well, I think there's a lot to unpack in that question. I think that Boris Johnson, who I should say is a friend of mine, although we have deep political disagreements, having behaved very badly over the Russia report, behaved very well over the invasion of Ukraine. And to this day, if you say you're a friend of Boris Johnson's, Ukrainians on the ground take that very seriously. And I think he understood the historical and the geopolitical import of what was happening, perhaps more than any other Western leader. And so he got in really early, and that was very important.
In terms of Russian money now and the situation, and especially the richest who are coming to London and they trying to build new images of to sort of find new place in the new political landscape right now. What's your observation on sort of on that side, and do you see it? Because there are some politicians or some oligarchs are mentioned, and some which feel very comfortable here are not mentioned, and they just keep what comfortable and enjoying themselves in London.
Well, I think it's become a different world for the oligarchs living in London, and they used to have a completely frictionless life here, and now they don't, and that's they have to worry about sanctions. They worry that they can't get banking services. There's a whole range of things that have changed for them, and they don't have the political influence that they used to have. So I'm glad about that. I think the failure of the British authorities really to get to grips with the oligarchs is a scandal. We've seen um, Roman Abramovich being forced to sell Chelsea Football Club. Good. The money going into trust. Good, for the benefit of the victims of the war of Ukraine. Sounds fine. But no successful legal move by the government actually to spend it. And so that money is just sitting there. And there are people in Ukraine who, whether you give it to Ukraine to win the war or whether you give it to Ukrainians for prosthetic legs or rehab or whatever, there's many, many deserving causes. And having the money sitting in a bank account in London is not one of them. So that's a scandal. We've also seen the enforcement authorities bungle attempts to deal with issues surrounding people like Misha Friedman. Now, I make no judgment about whether Mr. Friedman is guilty or innocent of any of the things that have been said about him, and a lot of these people still retain libel lawyers to protect their reputation, and that's fine, they're entitled to do that too. But I don't think anyone could look at the way the British authorities have dealt with the oligarchs post 2022 and say that's been a blazing success.
Edward, Do you think the methods and the approach of, let's say, Kremlin forces, those who trying to penetrate the British politics with money, are they changing? Sort of like depends on the situation, or they practically the same? Because you mentioned the Nathan Gill is the tip of the iceberg. So Nathan Gill, he's going to be sentenced and probably going to prison, as his barrister mentioned. So and it's just the tip of the iceberg. So there will be other politicians in whom Russia will be interested. So do you think the
Yes.
methods changing or the methods?
And I think they've had to become more discreet because the things of, it's as I said earlier, it's politically toxic now to be in a identified as a pro-Kremlin voice, except on the far left, sort of left, the sort of Corbynite and to the left, and maybe in some places in reform, people say, oh, well, we think Putin's a great patriotic leader, but I mean that it's way out of the political mainstream, and so I think that's changed things radically. We also don't have so many Russian intelligence officers in this country, so it's hard to get for them to make those sort of contacts. And we have revived our belatedly revived our counterintelligence and counter-subversion capability. And so, as Nathan Gill shows, there's a greater chance of getting caught.
The general public, what should they know, sort of like the gist of this situation with Russian money, British politics, and the current political situation? If you wanted to let them know, or maybe warn them, or sort of prepare them for something in terms of this situation, this corruption case, what would you like them to know?
Well, I think, as I've said, that I mean, we are facing a systematic threat from the Kremlin and from the Chinese Communist Party. And where they see a vulnerability, they'll exploit it. Sometimes they can create vulnerabilities. More often, they just exploit what they see. And I don't think that money on its own is the most important weapon. What is much more important is the combination of money, propaganda, cyber, blackmail, the so-called, the sort of sabotage. It's all designed to spread fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and to destroy cohesion in our society, both um, between countries and within countries. And the Kremlin has a great many tools in its toolbox. I once wrote an article called I think the Toxic 20, and people have given listing just 20 different things that the Kremlin did, and people immediately added another 10, and it became the Dirty 30. So you've got a, a sophisticated and very opportunistic adversary who, when one thing stops working, they just try another. And so we've seen, there was a time when they tried to pump money into British politics at a high level because our political parties and politicians were greedy, and Russia was seen as a friend, so that worked fine. Now that doesn't work anymore, so they try other things. And I think it's important to separate the what one might broadly call the activni meropriati, the active measures, which are part of the sort of broad Kremlin modus operandi going back decades, with the very specific question of intelligence collection. And that's a different bit of the Russian state, which is trying to spy on Britain and actually just find things out. I'm less worried about that, or I am worried about it. I'm less worried about the intelligence threat than I am about the broader sub-threshold warfare or active measures threat.
The question a bit away from the corruption. Many speakers in the media saying that right now we're sort of living in pre-European war. Because with the Russian attempts to interfere with the airspace of different countries. Do you think the actual war is coming to the UK? What's your feeling about it?
Well, I mean, as I've said, I think the we are already in a situation of um, intense conflict with Russia. And I think our categories of war and peace and victory and defeat maybe very convenient mentally for us, but they don't fit the real world. And from a Russian point of view, they see all politics and geopolitics as a struggle. And in that struggle, you use a wide spectrum of means. So, and sometimes it involves lethal force. And we've seen two examples in this country with the murder of Alexander Litvinenko and the attempted poisoning of Sergei Skripal. So it can extend to that, and many more people in those cases could have been killed because the poisoners were so careless. And we've probably seen a few other murders as well, though they haven't been properly attributed to Russia. We've seen the sabotage of our critical national infrastructure with disruption to aviation and things like that, all over Europe, but also instance in Britain. We've seen the whole dirty money and subversion attacks on our political system, including, I would argue, the attempt to rig elections by putting money into the Brexit campaign and possibly also into the Scottish independence referendum, which is another potential vulnerability. So it's a very broad spectrum, and I think that this country is not. We tend to think unless there's actually a formal declaration of war and parade, troops marching off down the street and the whole sort of legal and constitutional changes that come with a formal declaration of war, we think we're at peace. And that's just not the way the world works.
Edward Lucas, we discussed the Russian money in the British politics. Let me know what you think. Leave your thoughts in the comments. Please like, share, and subscribe if you haven't. I'm Jenny Klochko. Thank you for watching.